Hello everyone and welcome back to Winter 89 Colors. My name is Melissa and I am here today to do an Inktense pan background with you. Right, so let's just get straight into it. So I've got my page here. I've chosen Hanna Karlzon's Grains of Gold to do this in. I've put a protective sheet in the background before I get started. It's also lined with plastic, again to try and keep the water from spreading as much as possible. I've got some painter's tape here, which you can't see, but off screen I've gone and dabbed it all over my fleece sweater here to make sure that it's 90% less sticky than it was so that it doesn't tear the paper. Just enough stickiness, kind of like a sticky note, to just stick to the paper but not do any damage. And then we're going to get into it. So the first things first is we need to mask off this rose and vine a little bit. So I get a little bit of a palette, and I've got drawing gum today, but most masking fluids will work. I just happen to have the Pebeo drawing gum on hand. And I've also got a silicone brush. Silicone brushes are the best option for applying masking fluid of any kind, I find, because it helps to keep there's no bristles to get stuck together, and you can just wipe it off afterwards and it's all good. So I do pour my drawing gum out into a palette first because it does dry rather quickly and get gummy, so you don't want your jar to dry out. So I use my silicone brush, and this is something that takes a little bit of practice. You want to try and learn how to best move your masking fluid around on the paper. I've found over trial and error that it is best to make it as thick as possible. Put as much of it on as you can. I thought that making a thinner line would make it easier, but in fact, thicker is better. As thick as you can go, pile it on there. So I'm using this angled, pointy silicone brush, kind of like a dip pen. So the masking fluid does sort of collect at the top of the pen, and then as you press down, it kind of drains it down towards. So there's really no way for me to explain this other than that you need to practice with it. Find another sheet of paper, draw something on it, and practice getting it into your lines cleanly without, having it droop all over the place. This is just something you have to practice and get better at. So I'm not going to sit here explaining it for too long. I am going to speed up the footage and do some movie magic and have this done in a few minutes, but realistically, it probably takes me over an hour to completely mask off this entire image. I don't bother masking off those tiny little dots in the background because those I'm probably going to cover up with some kind of metallic paint or something like that, so I don't need to worry about masking them off. But everything else that I want to do in pencil or some other medium, I do all the masking and I cover everything because I'm going to be using so much water that the paint is going to get everywhere, the ink is going to get everywhere, so I'm not taking any risks, and I mask off the entire thing. So again, I'm going to speed this up, move this along, and then we'll kind of get moving into the actual painting part. So this is something I have experimented with. This is not something that I just was naturally good at. Remember this, it takes practice, and this still isn't perfect. I'm still learning as much as anyone else, but when it comes to the masking fluid and, knowing how much water the paper can take, I've done it a couple of times now, so I have an idea in my head. This is, it takes time to get to this, so don't feel discouraged if it doesn't go perfectly the first time you do it. So, I used to be really afraid of masking fluid and thinking that I was leaving it on too long or something like that, but I've found that masking fluid is more agreeable the more you ignore it. So leave it sitting on your page for as long as you possibly can before taking it off, and it will be much more agreeable when coming off, I have found. So with that movie magic, I am going to move along from this masking fluid, which is intensely boring and takes forever, and we will move into the techniques of actually creating color on this background. So here we go. All right, so now that is all done, you can see I've put masking fluid absolutely everywhere, and I've left it to dry for a couple of hours, or maybe an hour or so, and I've checked it to make sure that it's dry, and now I've got my Inktense pans out, and we're going to start creating some abstract art in the background. So first thing that I do is get this huge paintbrush, and I am going to wet the entire page. I just want to get a coating of water on here. And as you'll see, I'm making a smart decision here to take my plastic sheet off and give it a wipe down just to make sure there's no excess ink or paint from previous projects, because the water will reactivate that and mess up what I'm trying to do on here. So now I'm taking my big paintbrush and I am wetting the entire page to start giving us a base, because I don't want this ink to sink in too early. I want it to float around for a little while, so I'm drowning the paper in water. And Hanna Karlzon's paper can take this. It can handle it. It's going to seem like it's not, but I promise you in the end it's going to turn out okay. So I get my ink ready. I'm starting with this super light lime green here. This is pan set 1, by the way. And I'm just throwing ink down at random. Starting with my lightest color, I'm just throwing it on in patches just to get it down. And because I've pre-wet the paper, it's not going to sink in too much. Obviously, some of it will be permanent, but it's going to give me a minute to move it around. This is super fun, by the way. When you actually start doing this and get the confidence to just slop your ink on the page, it's so fun. So next, I'm moving on to this, this sort of hooker's green here. It's a nice bluish jungle green. I don't like the look of these colors together initially, but once we get them all tied in together, they look pretty fun. And you see how the light green is still moving around a little bit for me because it was put on wet paper. And of course, I'm adding more water as I'm going. I'm making sure that the Inktense, as it goes down, is very, very wet. Very wet. If you think it's too wet, it's not wet enough. Make it wetter. All right, I'm moving into my extremely dark forest green here. Mixing them all together. Oop, the light green's getting a little dry now because it's been sitting. But some of it can be re-wet, and we'll add more if we need to create the blending effect that we're going for. This is real time. I have not sped this up. I am literally just slopping color down onto the paper. And more water. Let's get it all mixed up here. There we go. See how it floats around and kind of, yeah, splatter it on there. I'm splattering water, just, you know, putting it on randomly, making sure that the ink is moving, moving, moving. That's what you just got to do. Keep the ink moving. And now I'm splattering ink. Just throwing it. I should have covered the other page because this is dangerous. I learned that in future situations. But yeah, I just start splattering the ink, and you'll notice that the ink is beginning to spread. It's not just sitting where I left it, it's following the water and spreading out and, you know, doing whatever it wants to do. Little circles are turning into little blotches and splatters and patterns, and it kind of creates, it allows the ink to do its own thing and create these abstract patterns in the background. And I'm using all the different inks, just splattering, splattering, splattering. I learn in the future after this video how to make better splatters with different brushes, but again, I was still pretty early in the game with this one, so bear with me. But I'm just using a big water paintbrush, lots of water, and splattering, splattering, splattering. Here I'm just adding little dots here and there to speed up the process, get the ink exactly where I want it to be. But you see, even those, because the page is so wet, they're just spreading out and expanding. And our image is completely safe because we've masked it off so well. Now I'm just adding more water to create more spreading effect. Dab, 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 dab. Just drop those drops everywhere. And if you need more precision, you just touch the brush lightly to the page to get that exact precision of where you want the water to go. But you'll see how the dots are still spreading, still moving. Nothing on this page is just sitting still. It's constant movement. And you just keep doing this over and over and over again. You add more of the 3 colors anywhere you think you need to. Splatter, 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 slop, slop, slop. If you've ever wanted to go back to kindergarten to paint, this is where we do it. Super fun. I'm having fun just watching this because I remember what it felt like to just be willy-nilly slopping stuff everywhere. Look at it, it's on the desk now. Oh my goodness. I should have covered the other page. This was so dangerous. I can't believe I didn't get more on that other page. Pardon me and my sniffling. Still a little sick. And there we have it. So now is the hard part, the waiting. You have to let this dry. And I let it dry for over 12 hours. So I let this sit well overnight before coming back and checking it. And it's completely dry. It's very crinkly though, of course it is. But you'll see nothing really seeped through. It all stayed on one page. There's a couple little spots there I'm pointing out, but those are flaws on my part where I actually got ink underneath the page, not where it soaked through. So you just have to be careful on the edges not to let it get underneath the page, but sometimes it's unavoidable and you'll just have to work it into the page behind, which is fine. Now I'm using a masking fluid eraser to move the masking fluid. It's my favorite method of removing the masking fluid. I know some people prefer to use their fingers, and I'm going to show you that here in a minute, that you can do that, but I find it taxing and very difficult on your fingers. Some people are afraid to use the eraser because they think it's going to hurt their page or move their product around, and I don't think that's the case. I haven't found that that's an issue. I find that it's just as effective, but faster, easier on your hands. You'll see here, I've got a close-up for you. I tend to stroke in one direction. I don't, go back and forth too much. I try to just go in one direction and peel it up. And my nails are in the way there. There we go. All right, and then I show you with my finger. You can do the same thing. But you have to press really hard. It takes a while. It's hard on your fingers. But if you don't have an eraser, you can use your fingers to remove it. I got bored of that and I'm back to the eraser. You'll see it just peels off nice and easily. No damage to the paper whatsoever. And this has been on there for a full day at least. I think my biggest problem before when using masking fluid in the past was that actually I wasn't leaving it long enough. I was so afraid that it was like tape, where the longer you leave it, the more stuck it gets, that I would pull it off too soon and the paper was still moist, so it was ruining the paper. But I find that if I leave it and let it sit for an eternity, it actually comes off much more agreeably and does zero damage to the paper. So let's just speed this up real quick, get this over with. But look at that background now that I've zoomed out. Do you see what we've created? This beautiful, splotchy, multicolored, intense background that doesn't move because it's Inktense. Nothing you do to it will change what it's like now that it's dry. It has dyed the paper, essentially. It's not just sitting on top of it. Yep, just getting the masking fluid off. I don't want to start talking about anything else because, like, we don't have much time. This is going to be done so quickly that I don't want to start a whole conversation about something. So I'm just going to let me get through the removal of this rose, and then we move on to the final stage. Just feel for any little bits that are left behind. You can see all the masking fluid that came off. Pretty neat, actually. I really enjoyed it. If you've never used masking fluid, it's really fun. Go for it. All right, so the next stage before we can get to coloring this page, which I'm going to do either off screen or in a different video, but the final stage is ironing. So I use a piece of cardstock, heavy cardstock, or you can use several sheets of paper, but I like to use one big heavy piece of cardstock behind, and then on top just a regular piece of copy paper. And then I pull out my iron. It's a regular household iron, but it is dry. There is no water in it whatsoever. no water. And I find it's fine to use on medium-high. Some people say you have to keep it on low. On good quality paper and ink like this, I find that high is fine and it gets the job done quickly. If you're doing it on like Cocoa Wyo paper, Amazon paper or cheaper ink, make sure you use it on low because it will transfer some of the ink around, even on pages beneath. But on high quality Hanna Karlzon paper, I find that using it on high is fine. But please be careful with irons. They are hot. Do not hurt yourself. If you've never used an iron before, which in this day and age isn't that uncommon, just please be careful and don't hurt yourself. And I just move it in slow, smooth motions, making sure I get right into the spine there. Yeah, not much to say about this. I mean, visuals are more useful than me talking over it. So just, slow, smooth motions. Never letting it sit in one place for too long because that's how you get burns on your paper. Just keep it moving slowly. Yeah, I pulled a piece of paper off just to check to see what it looks like, if it looks like it's flattened out. Now, you'll never get it perfect. It will never go back to the way it was before you soaked it with water, but the iron does help to take it back down to something that's workable. It's no longer just a giant, flimsy piece of crinkled paper. You'll see it's fairly smooth and workable again. All right, so this is about the end of it. I mean, there's not much else to show you. From here, you can go back to using your pencils, using more paints, acrylic markers, whatever it is that you use to color your page. It is now complete and ready to go. The background, you can even put more pencils and stuff over top of the background if you want to, but it's created something really, really dynamic and interesting as a base. And from here, you can work out whatever you want to do with the image. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate you being here. Make sure to check in the description box below for links to the products, and I will see you in the next one. Toodaloo!